A look at the top priorities for CFOs and finance leaders in the coming year. Among them, security and privacy of data, financial and strategic planning and analysis, leadership, and enhanced data analytics reveals a tale of transformation for CFOs whose responsibilities continue to widen. This is Kevin Donahue, Senior Director with Protiviti, welcoming you to a new edition of Powerful Insights. Protiviti just conducted its latest Global Finance Trend Survey and is covering the results in our new report, Transform, Assessing CFO and Finance Leader Perspectives and Priorities for the Coming Year. I recently spoke with Protiviti Managing Directors Chris Wright and Nic about some of the key findings and trends revealed in our results. Chris is the global leader of Protiviti's Business Performance Improvement Solution, and Nic leads Protiviti's cyber strategy and transformation practice. Nic, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And Chris, great to speak with you as well, as always.
It's good to be back with you, Kevin.
So, Chris, let me ask you our first question. I want to talk about AI. It remains one of today's hottest business topics. Relative to other finance areas, AI, including generative AI, does not sit high on the list of our priorities identified in our survey. But we found that 1 in 3 finance organizations currently employs generative AI. How are CFOs and finance leaders using AI today, and how do they envision its use evolving in the coming years?
Well, Kevin, it's interesting with regard to AI. While it was not at the top of the priorities for finance executives, it was on the list. And at 1/3 adoption, that's a pretty good representation of the state of affairs regarding AI as it relates to adoption versus interest. And so what we find when we present on this topic to CFOs is that while about 1/3 of them, even with a show of hands in a smaller group, will say they've started using it, everyone's interested in it. Everyone's talking about it. They're all curious. Some are concerned about it. Depending on their level in the organization, will it affect their job positively or negatively, or will it cease to exist, their job, because AI takes their place? But the leaders in the organizations are generally looking to AI, generative AI for FP&A and budgeting and forecasting and predictive capabilities and the ability to gather data and information for compliance, for filling in forms, something as simple and mundane as that. They're using diagnostic AI to look at expense reduction. And even within their own organization, and within our survey, organizational issues did rank high as well. AI as a work effort, as something for the newer generations of the workforce to do, to make them feel as much like data scientists as accountants, and keep them in the finance organization, to maintain the interest of their employees and keep the job and the function up to date and more interesting to the newer generations that are entering the workforce now.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. And I have a feeling we're going to circle back to a few more things around AI as we talk today. But Nic, I wanted to talk to you about what is our top priority identified in our survey, the security and privacy of data. Overall, as well as CFOs and finance leaders specifically called out that area. And they did not call out one of the core areas of finance and accounting as the top priority, which is interesting. What do you see as some of the factors contributing to this high priority ranking?
I got to tell you, it surprised me as well. I would have expected something else to be towards the top of the list, but there's actually probably a couple of things that are pushing this up in the minds of our financial leadership out there. Regulation, capital R regulation, it continues to be a big one. Regulation is nothing new, but what we are seeing are new versions of regulation that are coming out that have more specific cyber-oriented requirements built into them. Take, for example, NYDFS released a new version here recently. There's a high degree of precision within that in terms of kind of the requirements that organizations need to have in place. And with that, not only are you kind of getting the attention of senior leadership because it's regulatory oriented, and if you can't go and meet those regulations, it's going to have an adverse impact on your ability to go do business in those markets or across certain types of industries. But there's also a financial impact that comes with in terms of possibly the investment that needs to be made just to continue to enhance the cybersecurity program itself. I would argue that the most top of mind regulation, mostly because it went across all industries, was the new amendments that came out via the SEC late last year. And while there's not the degree of precision or just kind of the volume of requirements that came with it, it got everyone's attention. And so now we're having all of these discussions about what does materiality mean in the eyes of the business. And certainly the first place that people start looking with regards to materiality is, well, what's the financial impact? If something bad happens, what's the financial impact? So the CFO is going to automatically get pulled into those discussions. The fact that basically any publicly traded company or any company that's got that's regulated by the SEC, there's now new responsibilities in there for financial services companies and organizations like that. Like probably not anything that's different from what they've already been doing for a number of decades now, but for companies that haven't traditionally invested as much in cybersecurity, this is now kind of pushing them in some new directions, and that gets them out of their comfort zone. The last thing I would kind of throw out there, and this is again kind of a nod to the materiality side of things, is the concept of resilience and really that concept being born out of all things ransomware. Ransomware is the big kind of scary boogeyman around the corner in cybersecurity right now. It's a highly effective method of not only crippling a business, but to quickly generate some cash flow for the bad guys in the interim. And so that is obviously something that's going to, again, involve your leadership, your financial leaders like the CFO and others, if and when that were to hit your organization. So you really start to kind of put all of those things into the same pot. I could start to maybe understand, okay, this is why it's got the attention of CFOs and other financial leaders at organizations.
What are some of the ways in which CFOs and their teams can partner with CISOs, other IT and security leaders to ensure the organization's data is safe from cyber threats?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not always what I would call a natural alignment, at least traditionally speaking. And in some instances, it's even adversarial in nature. I do think that's changing, and it's time for it to change. Two big opportunities that come top of mind to me are on what I call the coaching front and the business alignment front. On the coaching side of things, when a CISO leans in or comes to ask for support or perspective, the CFO can lean in and maybe go even further and be proactive in reaching out to them. The CFO has a grasp and an understanding of the business, of maybe what shareholders and the board are expecting. They're going to bring a perspective to the table that is, I think, valuable to some of the decisions the CISO is trying to make and how they're trying to support the business. So ask questions, offer support, be a coach to them, and that will help kind of create that ability for one executive to be a successful kind of shepherd for another executive, especially rising executive in the organization, especially in front of senior leadership and the board. And I think it's an important time because when you look at business as a whole, the digitization of business and revenue streams is at an all-time high. And as we continue to see expansion there's going to be a need to wrap cybersecurity around those from a resiliency perspective, which I mentioned before. And again, we kind of talked about some of the material aspects that the regulators are pushing on. There's a more natural partnership to be had. Certainly from a CFO perspective, they're the master of all budgets, if you will, in an organization. And so on the budget fronts, CFOs, we want them to hold CISOs accountable in a manner that CISOs need to show and demonstrate the value that the investment that they're making is there and that it's in alignment with where the organization is going. But the CFO can also, again, kind of be a supporting mechanism to help shepherd them through budgeting processes or how to be successful in asking for additional funds and things like that. So I think those are all opportunities for an enhanced partnership when you look at the CISO and the CFO. The last thing that I would say is CFOs have a pretty good understanding of risk. And when we talk about cybersecurity programs, that North Star is what we call a business aligned cybersecurity program. Now, what does that mean to be business aligned? There's a lot of different opinions on that, but I'm a fan and always point to making sure we've got alignment on risk across the organization. Because at the end of the day, a cyber program is there to make sure we're able to hit our regulatory requirements, to help manage and reduce risk across the organization and eliminate it on some fronts. And in those rare instances, actually be kind of a business enabler in some different ways as revenue streams are being digitized and things like that. And so being able to have a healthy relationship with the CFO is going to put us in a position to better understand risk across the business and how we're kind of merging those traditional revenue streams with new revenue streams and what that kind of does to our overall risk profile and making sure we've got alignment with regards to risk appetite, risk tolerance, things like that. Those are one of the key areas where we see big disconnects and gaps between kind of what the CISO thinks and what the senior leadership team and the CFO typically thinks. So some different ideas on how those groups can come together and be kind of champions and partners with each other.
Thanks, Nic. Chris, let's pivot and talk about financial planning and analysis, or FP&A. Financial planning, profitability analysis, reporting ranks as the second highest finance priority in our study, just below security and privacy of data. I mean, barely below that. Why is this the case in terms of this area ranking so highly? I expect it has something to do with FP&A responsibilities spreading throughout the enterprise so that they're not just a finance issue, but something that all business owners have to take on.
Kevin, it's an issue of high rank this year. It was last year when you take together a number of questions we asked in the area. In our prior year survey, our respondents represented a global audience, about half public, half private. So there's no reason from any of the demographics why it would be as high as it is, other than the fact that FP&A is a ubiquitous activity for the finance function. It's forecasting, it's analysis, it's helping the business use data to come up with the kind of information that allows the finance leaders and other leaders to manage the business. And as you suggested, FP&A is increasingly involving more users. So there are more people requesting the information and more participants. So it's not just the finance function coming up with all the numbers, but they're working with logistics, they're working with sales, they're working with HR, they're working with technology, both the technology that a company might sell if it's in the business, and with IT, which processes the company's own technology and information. And so more users, more participants, and also a greater frequency of the need for analysis. We saw that during the pandemic as companies had to reforecast regularly for bad news, or for news that might have been bad, or for the impact of events that were beyond their control in the earlier part of this decade. Fast forward to the last year or so, inflation, and it's been variable. So it goes up, it goes down, interest rates up and down. Any of those factors that have changed have required regular reforecast. So the increased frequency of FP&A. And then, of course, all the technology, all the tools, AI being an entrant into one of the data points that can be used in FP&A, all point toward more activity. And this is one area where there is a sort of a direct hit. FP&A is the finance function's job, but they're coordinating a greater audience, both from a user perspective and from a participant and data source perspective, in addition to some of the non-financial planning and analysis, because the finance function is increasingly viewed as sort of the stewards of the data, particularly in a public company where there's two people signing a filing. It's a chief executive officer and a chief financial officer. I think it's pretty clear who will be responsible for the data. And so they are increasingly responsible for non-GAAP FP&A, for non-financial FP&A, if you will, the P&A that's not financial, and also being asked to up their game. And so, as they optimize their capabilities in FP&A, we would say that then they've they've achieved a status of being really BP&A, business planning and analysis, and focusing on higher level activities that allow them to be analysts of data as opposed to the creators of data. So all of that taken together, it makes that answer not surprising. And I would echo what Nic had to say about cyber between the regulations for public companies, and I would add the companies that do business with public companies, because everybody's part of that food chain of information. The use of materiality, where the finance function is quite comfortable, and often the people who crunch the numbers on what is material or can help guide people to what should be considered material. And then also the more mundane aspects of ransomware, the finance function has to come up with the money to pay it in a situation where there has been a problem. So all of that, I think, is supportive of, in the FP&A area and also in the tech area, the finance function being a part of more discussions. And by the way, I should add, without taking anything else off their plate. So everything's an and. There's nothing that comes off. So it's incremental effort, and then that requires them to use different tools and technologies because they don't have infinite budgets, and so they're expected to do more with the same. Not necessarily more with less, but more with the same. And so they're looking to FP&A and other areas, and using AI in FP&A as a means to lighten the load and increase their ability to analyze data rather than spend their time gathering it and collecting it and then curating it.
Chris, my next question is around technology enablement. This is another area that permeates the top finance priorities identified in our study, from process improvements and enhanced data analytics to use of cloud-based applications. Can you speak about the relationship between tech enablement and modernization and cost optimization?
Sure, Kevin. And there's some pretty direct relationships between the two. We also found that our survey respondents, those that had used AI, for example, indicated that they had saved money by doing so, either money or time, and time being money in all cases. They'd save some money. So you think about it, you sort of break it down for a finance and accounting operation. How does it help their own team? New or upgraded ERPs and related supporting systems that are fit for purpose are going to make their lives easier. The ability to analyze data as they're expected to produce GAAP financial, non-GAAP, non-financial data allows them to spend their time more analytically and less in the gathering and preparation of data, as they do more with the same. Again, not necessarily more with less, maybe more with a little more, but more likely doing more with the same. So for their own team, it's a way to do the work and achieve the goals they have, to have more interesting jobs and to provide better data on a more timely basis to their internal customers. For the organization, IT is just a major source of spend. So to the extent you can modernize, upgrade, make more rational your technology usage, then you're making better use of your technology spend. And you're either saving money or redeploying it to the type of technology similar to what Nic talked about that allows you to get into better markets, into more products and services, and focus on revenue generation as much as saving on spend. So that you can not only save money by using less systems or using them more efficiently, but also you can create earnings by redirecting that funding to marketing or to enabling things that generate revenue. So it's really, it can be looked at in both senses, but it's fairly obvious. If you're able to automate a process, you can either save the money that you were spending on the manual process or redirect it to other more valuable efforts. And so you can just sort of use that as the baseline assumption and take it from there. IT rationalization, IT modernization, automation, better analytics, all of that supports not only the finance organization, but allows them to monitor and manage the spend elsewhere in the organization as they not only produce the data, but try to influence the outcome.
Thanks, Chris. And I actually will cite that one statistic about AI here. We learned that 21% of organizations say they've achieved valuable cost and efficiency benefits and improved their finance projects through the use of AI and machine learning. So this is already making a big difference. And I'll remind our listeners again that our full report on the results of our latest Global Finance Trends Survey, the report's called Transform, Assessing CFO and Finance Leader Perspectives and Priorities for the Coming Year, is available on the Protiviti website. So, Chris and Nic, thanks. This has been a great conversation. I have one final question. I'll ask both of you to answer, and Nic, maybe I'll have you go first. From data governance and management to technology enablement and the use of AI, things we've been talking about today, how do you see the finance organization evolving over the next 5 years?
Well, honestly, I liked a lot of Chris's perspectives early. The AI is everywhere right now. Actually, it interested me to hear that, a third, I think, was the number. I would venture a guess the number is way higher than that, and they don't even realize that it's AI that they're dealing with or some earlier version of generative AI. So I think it's a lot more prevalent in enterprises than what people realize. So, I think we're going to continue to see a push on this front. One, because all of the kind of the tier one partners for these organizations are diving headfirst into this as a solution on multiple fronts. You look at the investment, there's been nearly $1 trillion in AI infrastructure built out in a very short amount of time. That infrastructure needs to start making money in some way, shape, or form. And so I think you're going to see a continued push on the AI front. We talked a little earlier about the regulatory landscape. That is not going anywhere, and it's going to continue to be a lot more challenging because you're taking regulations that in some instances were written well before some of the new technologies that are being launched are now being wrapped around those technologies, and it's very square peg, round hole. And so you get some interesting interpretations of kind of what these regulations mean across some of these newly digitized and new technology environments. So I think that's something that's going to be top of mind for financial leaders. But most importantly is with any type of tech-driven disruption or technology-driven opportunity, it's all going to come back to how is this impacting our revenues, our margins, our shareholder value, and how are we able to seize some of these new tools and capabilities to continue moving those goals in the right direction while trying to maintain acceptable cost containment measures and everything that comes with that. So at the end of the day, it's still business, and we're still trying to generate revenue in a profitable way, and for publicly traded companies, keep our shareholders happy. And it's just kind of new tools and tricks and things that we're using to bring that to life these days. So I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot that's really changing at the most macro levels, but it's just kind of how we're getting there that is going to, I think, require a lot of focus and some creative thought.
And Chris, final thoughts from you?
Sure. I think a lot of what we see as emerging now in 5 years will be business as usual. In fact, it's quite possible that what's new now will be BAU to the extent that it may not even be on the list of concerns or priorities, because it's just part of what everybody does every day. If you think about the number of people who will answer the question about whether or not they're using AI, and to Nic's point, that they know of, that's probably going to be 100%. And when people realize that you can save, as the 21% of our respondents who said they had saved money using things like that, everyone else is going to want in on that. And so I would imagine that the finance organizations will have to react to that. They'll be upskilling. We see a lot of interest there. And let's use AI as an example. The more senior members of the workforce now who may not know a lot about AI will be employing new entrants into the workforce who do. Who will not know necessarily, because they don't have the experience, why or what they're supposed to do with data like that. And so there'll be a partnership among the workforce generations around who's setting the context, but then who's able to actually process the information using the new technology. And so what I think you'll see is finance organizations that are as focused as ever, if not more so, on how to deal with knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing and upskilling across the finance organization on matters such as that, which are emerging. And so you'll have people who are not only accountants, but also view themselves as data scientists or both.
I want to thank Chris Chris and Nic for joining me today for this informative discussion on the views of CFOs and finance leaders around the world. A number of things really stood out to me. Number one, the use of AI is on the rise. Not surprising, but it's definitely making its mark on finance organizations and will continue to do so in the months and years to come. Cybersecurity considerations remain huge, both from protecting data and also the new reporting requirements that have emerged over the last year or two. And lastly, as Chris noted, we have this and dynamic. CFOs and finance leaders don't have other things coming off their plate. New responsibilities, new projects keep coming to them, requiring stronger management expertise and bringing in the right skills and resources to support their finance organization and the entire business. Again, our report, Transform, Assessing CFO and Finance Leader Perspectives and Priorities for the Coming Year, can be found on our Protiviti website, and you could do a deep dive into the global results of this informative study. And lastly, I encourage you to please subscribe to our Powerful Insights podcast series and to review us wherever you get your podcast content.